gusto ng taong bayan.
May pag-asa na masolusyonan ang krisis sa edukasyon.
May pag-asa na masimula ng reforma.
May pag-asa na masuri ang mga bagong lider.
Isang mapagpala at mapagpalayang hapon po, Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao. A pleasant afternoon to all our colleagues here in the Philippines and also overseas. This is episode 1, season 2 of the webinar series Tackling the Philippine Learning Crisis Together in cooperation with the Philippine Business for Education. National Teachers College welcomes all of you to this important discourse on how we should look at education as an important dimension of our growth as a nation. Ang ating pong pagtitipon sa hapong ito ay napakahalaga lalo pat naghahanda tayo para sa ating pagpili ng mga bagong pinuno ng ating pamahalaan. Our webinar series consists of panel discussions that allow our selected resource persons to spontaneously talk about their views on specific topics connected with the learning crisis. We strongly encourage our audience in the Zoom meeting platform to please use the chat function to key in your insights and inquiries. Meantime, for our viewers over at our FB Live right now, you could also use the chat function and our team members will be able to capture your insights and questions. Mahalaga po sa amin ang inyong mga pananaw, saloobin at opinyon, lalo pat pipiliin namin ang ilan sa inyong mga tugon at tanong upang ating talakayin sa piling ng ating mga pinagpipitagang naimbitahang panauhin sa hapong ito. I am Ed Fermin, the Vice President for Academic Affairs of National Teachers College, and I will be moderating this discussion. Sa ating pong mga kasamahan na nasa PBED at Private Education Assistance Committee pages, magandang hapon din po sa inyo at nagpapasalamat kami kay Love Basiliote at kay Doris Ferrer para sa kanilang pakikipagtulungan sa ating cross-posting sa hapong ito. Gayon din po pinasasalamatan natin ang Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities o PACU sa kanilang pakikisa rin sa hapong ito. It's now time for us to get to know the members of our distinguished panel this afternoon. At napakapalad po natin dahil hindi araw-araw nagsasama ang mga kasamahan natin ito sa isang panel. Kaya ating na po silang kilalanin at sana ay mapakinggan natin mula sa kanila ang iba't ibang opinyon at pananaw hinggil sa ating usapin sa hapong ito. Habang hinihintay po natin ang isa nating kasamahan mula sa PBED na sumama ay tatawagin muna natin ang mga panauhin natin na naririto na ngayon. So hayaan niyo po na ipakilala ko sila isa-isa. I'd like to welcome the very first woman director of the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization Secretariat or SIMIO, which is the executive arm that covers all the ministries of education from the 11 member states making up the SIMIO and the ASEAN for that matter. She is the 18th director of this esteemed education body and has been very influential and has contributed a lot in understanding the major changes in the education landscape of the Philippines, both in her capacity as researcher, program developer, grants manager. I think she has worn all the hats, both in the Department of Education and the Commission on Higher Education. Not to mention, Dr. Valenzuela really advocates many of the priority areas of development in education, not only in the country, but also in the Philippines. Now, after I've called on our guests, by the way, we will ask them a Miss Universe question. And the Miss Universe question is, what has been your most life-changing experience being an active player in the education sector? So, friends, the first member of our panel is Dr. Ethel Agnes Pascua Valenzuela. Dr. Ethel, good afternoon po.
Good afternoon, Dr. Ed. And maganda nakita ko ulit ang aking teacher sa Lasal, Father June Inocencio, and the panel. Yeah, I'm very happy to join you. Sasagutin ko na ba yung Miss Universe question or later?
Pwede na.
Okay, so early in my career, I was a teacher at De La Salle, and then I moved to CHED for 10
Recording
years
in progress.
to internationalize higher education as Director of International Affairs. So ano yung life-changing experience ko? So when I joined Simeo Inotech in 2006, my first work was actually on access to quality education by Muslim learners funded by USAID. So grabe talaga yung experience ko doing all the work for Mindanao that time. And actually, I went all over Mindanao, Tawi-Tawi, lahat yan, every part of Mindanao to profile learners at wala silang access to education. So that one, na makita ko, many of these kids are crying. They wanted access to education. They want to go to school. They're struggling every day. And wala silang choice. It's either food or going to school. They go to, work as early as 7 or 8 years old. So kailangan nating baguhin yung sistema kasi gusto nilang mag-aral. Pero ano unahin, bigas or eskwelahan? So that is really a big eye-opener for me kasi yung extreme poverty, and we need to do something. We have reviewed our policies, kasama yung ating constitution. At bakit? Ano problema doon? So, and second is the K-12 regional comparison. So ako din yung nag-lead nung pag-aaral. Paano ba natin gagawing mas may kalidad ang ating edukasyon? What's wrong with our system? So in my K-12 regional comparison, pinag-aralan natin Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, Thailand, and the rest. And nagpunta rin kami sa Hong Kong to see. Doon natin nakita yung ating curriculum, what's wrong with our curriculum, all our policies, at doon nga nagkaroon na tayo ng K-12 system. Lahat eye-opener for me. So thank you very much for that question, Doc.
Thank you, Dr. Ethel. No? Hindi lang pang Miss Simeo, pang Miss Universe to talaga. So just to remind you. So moving on to our next member of the panel, if Dr. Valenzuela studied the comparison of our education system, our next panelist has been studying the technical vocational education landscape here and abroad, I think for the longest time. And if there's a go-to person, every time we need to understand what we can do better in terms of technical education and skills development, this panelist really can tell you a lot about the priorities at lahat po ng mga issue na may kinalaman sa pagpapatuloy ng access sa pag-aaral o edukasyon ng mga taong hindi naman talaga pinalad makapasok sa formal na sistema ng edukasyon. He is the Chancellor of the Don Bosco Education Centers and is also the Vice President for Academic Affairs of Don Bosco Technical College, Mandaluyong, where he also served as the Dean of the college. And if we try to look at the many changes happening now at the Technical Skills Development Authority, we owe that to this panelist because he is actually a member of the TESDA board. In fact, nagpapasalamat po kami sa kabila ng meetings niya today sa TESDA board. Pinaunlakan niya ang ating paanyaya. So please welcome and let's hear the insights of Father June Inocencio. Good afternoon po, Father June.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Ed, for inviting me to this forum and become part of this panel discussion. And you know very well that I have been so dedicated in terms of technical vocational education in the country. And I think that's my life ever since I came into the congregation. And for 20 years, I have led the congregation in terms of the development of our school system. And it is through this involvement that maybe I have been exposed in the educational field, sharing this aspect of technical vocational education to the rest of the world. And this kept me so busy and be involved in so many organizations. Even in our congregation, I've taken leadership in the development of our education apostolate. We have 16 training centers in Luzon, in 6 learning centers, 2 colleges, and 6 basic education. And my involvement now in Test of Board has become also very expensive, that I have to attend so many meetings, and I've been glued to the screen almost all day, attending various activities, meetings, webinars, multitasking, even attending 2 or 3 events at the same time, and sometimes of different time zone. And I could not even anymore rely on the regularity of my body clock, because it often has been disturbed. And yet, as time unfolds, I was given more and more responsibility, expanded my network of engagements, stretching my performance even as I move on to my 73 years, and pursuing commitment that I dedicated myself in the education and evangelization of the young. It demanded a lot of time management and challenge of the use of technology to cope with the demands of the digitalized world. And you see how even at this stage, you have to read it now again. They learn and unlearn so many things. Yeah, and that's maybe what kept me busy all this time.
Okay. Thank you so much, Father June. It has been a very colorful journey for you, it appears, and we'll add more color to that as we try to get a lot of insights from you this afternoon. Meantime po, let's introduce and get to know our third panelist, who's also the co-presenter of this webinar series. The Executive Director of the Philippine Business for Education is here with us this afternoon. She's currently leading its new advocacy program, Education Nation. And for almost a decade, she has managed education and social support projects that provide scholarships for aspiring teachers, skills training for out-of-school and unemployed youth, and social protection for displaced workers and their families. She has finished her degrees from the University of the Philippines in Los Baños and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. We are very fortunate to actually have with us also this afternoon, Miss Diane Fajardo. Fudge, good afternoon.
Hi,
Are
good
you ready for
afternoon.
your Miss Universe answer?
Thank you very much for that wonderful question.
Okay.
Ayun, kwento ko lang when I started with PBED, so I handled a scholarship program for aspiring teachers, and we went to Tawi-Tawi, to Mindanao, and we wanted to recruit IP teachers or future IP teachers, and meron doon mga members of the community na first time mag-college sa community nila and sa family nila. So that's really inspiring. But at the same time, it opened my eye na hindi enough kasi, and they're really disadvantaged kasi even though we give them free scholarship, ganyan, and even support, hindi sila makapasa dun sa partner school namin with the really high standard of teacher education. So parang it's a vicious cycle na we want to improve the quality of education in IP communities and in far-flung areas, pero yung teachers natin who will be coming from there, hindi rin prepared to go through a training that will provide them with the necessary skills to implement good teaching. So chicken and egg, and we need to parang have that intervention in different points, diba? Parang while improving basic ed, especially in last mile schools, we also need to advocate for improving teacher quality, especially for IP teachers. So yeah, thank you very much. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fudge, Miss Pibed, for this afternoon. The last member of our panel is someone whom we really admire a lot for his courage to really look at the extent of all the issues affecting Philippine education, particularly in higher education. Currently finishing his PhD at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom, as a Jardine Scholar. He is also concurrently a senior research fellow at the University of the Philippines Center for Integrative and Development Studies. As the former executive director of the Commission on Higher Education, he has led a lot of the crucial transition programs when the K-12 program was also rolled out in basic education. He's having worked with our esteemed education Senator Edgardo J. Angara, has also enabled him to understand the total landscape within which education in the Philippines is currently being managed. We are very lucky because maaga po siyang gumising sa kabilang parte ng mundo sa umaga niya ngayon. Please welcome Carol Markey. Carol?
Hi Ed, good afternoon sa lahat at good morning sa ibang nasa UK din siguro nanonood. It's my pleasure to be part of this panel. Siguro yung sasagutin ko na yung question mo, no? I guess I'll start with the anchor, no, which was really my time with Senator Angara. And during that time, we worked in the Early Years Act. And so when I did my master's program in the US and then I came home to the Philippines, my first work was to do field work in Sultan Kudarat on early childhood care and development. So mapping best practices. And pumunta kami sa isang daycare center, no? Nasa gitna siya ng mga pinyahan na mararating mo lang pag sumakay ka ng habal-habal. So obviously, I didn't have a lot of expectations. Pero alam mo, nung nagkukwentuhan kami doon kung paano nila ginagawa yung trabaho nila. And you have to understand that daycare workers in the Philippines, their plight is that they don't have plantilla positions. Yung sweldo nila, pass the hat. Yung mga magulang na gustong mag-contribute. So kung magkano lang mabigay sa kanila, yun yung sweldo nila. Pero alam mo yung nung kinukwento nila sa akin yung diskarte nila, kung paano nila turuan yung mga bata, kung paano nila kinukuha yung suporta ng mayor, yung kung paano nila pinaplano yung i-invite daw nila si mayor sa graduation ceremony para lang mapansin sila. Alam mo, it reminded me of the courses I did parang just a few months back when I was sitting in a classroom in the US. Kasi they were talking about community and family engagement. They were talking about deeper learning and how it happens among our learners. And sabi ko nga, ang galing ng sistema, ang galing ng mga teachers natin. It gave me hope and it was very humbling kasi there is so much expertise on the ground. Yung mga practitioners natin talaga may puso, may malasakit at may kagalingan. And it showed me that there is so much potential if only there is a system that supports and enables them to actually succeed. And I think yun yung naging driving force ko later on in the work that I've done, maybe not in ECCD, but in CHED and in other agencies that I've worked with afterwards. So that was a very moving experience that I think I will not forget.
Yeah. Nakakatuwa po, no? Maraming salamat, Mark. Yung mga nakaupo po sa panel natin ngayon, pinagdaanan nila yan, serving from preschool education, lalo na si Mark, no, sa Universal Kindergarten Law, hanggang sa graduate education, no? Nandiyan si Ethel, si Father June. And of course, Fadj is working also on the ground, trying to understand these things. Kaya po sana, sa hapong ito, makisangkot po kayo, gamitin natin ang chat room, ang chat facility natin para makapagbahagi tayo ng ating mga opinion. Dahil ngayong araw po na to, 35 years ago, we ratified the 1987 Constitution that contains our state education goals. Actually, kung meron po tayong laging binabanggit na batas, kapag nag-uusap tayo ng reforma sa edukasyon, lagi tayong bumabalik sa konstitusyon. Kaya dun sa mga nag-aaral po ng batayang batas para sa edukasyon, nakikinig sa atin ngayon, para po sa inyo ito at para sa ating lahat na naghahangad na sana naman ay edukasyon naman ang tutukan natin talaga dahil ito ay napakalaking bahagi ng ating pag-unlad bilang isang bayan. Kaya bakit hindi natin simulan ito, no? Yung segment po natin na to, ang tinatawag natin na pass, fail, or incomplete. Next naman, no? Para tayo magbibigay ng grade sa saligang batas, no? Nandyan po sa screen natin ngayon yung 5 key state education goals ng Republika ng Pilipinas. Yan po yung agad niyong makikita sa ating Article 14 sa ating Constitution na pinamagatang Education, Science and Technology, Arts, Culture, and Sports. So, tatanungin natin yung panelists natin ngayon. Ang sequence natin, si Dayan, susundan siya ni Carol, tapos si Ethel, tsaka si Father June, no? Hindi po namin to in-arrange according to age. Okay.
Obvious ba?
gusto nating marinig, no? Ano ba, kung pag-uusapan natin yung 5 objectives na to ng edukasyon sa Pilipinas, 35 years na to, no? Are we a pass, a fail, or an incomplete? Okay, magkakaalaman na tayo. So, let's start the ball rolling with Dayan. Dayan?
Thanks, Ed. Yung dun sa unang objective no, o layunin, I think incomplete, special or needs improvement. Kasi nakita natin na hindi angkop yung o hindi umangkop yung ating education agencies nung nagkaroon tayo ng pandemya. And huli din tayo sa pagbubukas ng klase, di ba? Or may pilot pero iilan lang compared sa thousands of schools na kailangang buksan na. Sa pangalawa naman, I think pass naman kasi naisabatas ang K-12 law, which is really a big feat for Philippine education. But of course, kumbaga for me, hindi pa ito uno kasi madami rin kailangan pang ayusin sa K-12 law. So, yon. Sa pangatlo, incomplete kasi di pa naiisabatas ang Teacher Education Scholarship under the Teacher Excellence Act. However, kumbaga ratified na siya ng Congress pero hindi pa napipirmahan. So, konti na lang papasa na or malapit na or after 30 days for sure meron ng National Scholarship for Teachers. No? Pero at the same time, kaya siya incomplete kasi hindi rin efficient yung voucher program natin. So, right now we have it sa senior high school but hopefully we can also expand it in the lower grades. Kasi with the pandemic, ang daming mga pamilyang naapektuhan ng kabuhayan, madaming nag-shift to public schools. Pero hindi rin equip yung public schools to accommodate. Even though hindi na face-to-face, yung teachers din, di ba, overwork na sila with all these blended learning setup. So, yun. Pang-apat, needs improvement or incomplete din. Kasi kahit na naipasa yung ALS law, pinakamalaking porsyento pa rin ng mga hindi nag-enroll ay galing sa ALS. So madami ring fallout. Tapos we also need to be equipped with ALS teachers kasi even though mayroon nang may bureau na rin sa DepEd na ALS na kaka-establish lang. Yun, kailangan din natin i-ramp up na magkaroon tayo ng madaming teachers that specializes on ALS. Yun, at saka as I've mentioned a while ago, yun, yung mga students natin in far-flung places in last mile areas, wala silang teacher wala silang teacher that can give them the right education. At the same time, yung mga teacher, kung gusto man nilang maging teacher, hirap din sila na mahubog into the teacher that their communities need. Diba? Nandun tayo sa diskarte, pero diba, if mas masuportahan pa nga sila, mas mabuti. And lastly, itong pang-5, incomplete din or needs improvement kasi malawak, even though na malawak na ang nasasagap ng TechVoc training, kailangan pa rin itong i-improve. And at the same time, dito sa civic education, we need to strengthen our curriculum and actually have better resource materials. Unfortunately, madaming mga civic ed teachers ang biktima din ng disinformation at sadly nababasa nila ito sa kanilang mga estudyante. So mas kailangan pa talagang pagtibayin.
Thank you, Fudge. No? Parang meron tayo talaga ngayong report card to the nation or checklist of some sort. No? So per request by our very active audience, no? Nandyan po uli sa screen natin yung ating pass, fail, or incomplete. But we will now turn over the virtual floor to Carol to tell us more of his inputs. Go ahead, Carol.
Thank you, Ed. Ako yung score ko, isa muna yung bibigay kong score for all the points na ano. So sa akin incomplete kasi pwede pa namang maging uno pero kailangan punan yung mga pagkukulang. Kailangan in context, no. Alalahanin natin na yung 1987 Constitution pagkapasa nito, noong 1988 nagkaroon tayo ng Free High School Act, noong 1989 nagkaroon tayo ng GASPE na in-expand noong 1998. After that, noong mga 2010s, pinasa yung Early Years Act, Kindergarten Act, yung K-12 law, nagkaroon ng Senior High School, and most recently, yung Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act. Pagdating sa access, talagang exceeds expectations tayo. Pero may mga pagkukulang. Pagdating sa quality, alam natin talagang medyo bagsak tayo doon. So nababalanse yung score. Tapos ikalawa, pagdating sa inclusiveness ng ating education system, yung non-formal learning na binanggit ni Faj, yung out-of-school youth, talagang kailangan pang trabahuhin. Yung adult education, halos wala. Kailangan talagang pagsikapan natin na mabuo ito. Bagamat may mga batas tulad ng Philippine Qualifications Framework, Ladderized Education Act, very good on paper, pero pwede pang paigtingin yung implementation. I think ikatlo, and I will go beyond the list that you've provided, kasi when I went to the Constitution and studied it the other day, Section 3 includes a phrase that struck me particularly in the context of the national elections. There's a phrase there that says that educational institutions, and I will read from my notes kasi mahaba, shall inculcate patriotism and nationalism, respect for human rights, teach the rights and duties of citizenship, strengthen ethical and spiritual values, develop moral character and personal discipline, encourage critical and creative thinking, broaden scientific and technical knowledge. And so yes, we should focus on quality, and that is paramount. Pero yung question ko is, ano yung depth natin? And paano natin tinuturo yung depth? Ang Tagalog translation ko dito ay pagpapalalim. Paano natin tinuturo at sinusukat ang pagpapalalim ng pagmamahal sa bayan, paggalang sa kapwa at sa buhay, at pagganap natin bilang mamamayan ng ating bayan? Siguro dapat pag-isipan natin how we are actually doing this also. Yan lang. Salamat.
Thank you, Mark. No? At nakikita niyo po na may yung flavor ng ating mga usapin dito ay makikita niyo mamaya mas lalalim pa yan. No? Sana rin po nakikinig tayo mabuti kasi pag sinagutan niyo po yung evaluation form natin, yung sagot po sa mga tanong doon nandito sa mga sinasabi ng speakers natin. Kaya wag kukurap at tiyakin niyo po nakikinig kayo. So we now listen to Dr. Ethel for her insights. Dr. Ethel.
Thank you very much. Ang ganda ng mga pananaw ng mga panelists natin. Well, ang tinitingnan ko dito is Article 14 of our 1987 Constitution. So, ang grade ko dito, kung titingnan natin yung goal setting ng Philippines as compared to the world and also to the region, napakaganda nung nilagay sa Philippine Constitution. Sa mga nagtitake ng LET, kasama to usually. So, itong Article 14 na to, makikita natin, relevant pa rin siya. In fact, nasa Sustainable Development Goals pa yung mga yan that we still have to work on. Ang tinitingnan ko dito is, in terms of goal setting, yes, pero when it comes to implementation, dito tayo nagkakaroon ng problema. Ang dami pa rin nating dapat gawin. So, well set naman siya. Yes, I agree. Yung scholarship natin, being the chair director for scholarship, ang daming na-develop na batas na legislate catering to all. So yung mga magagaling, we have scholarship for them, indigenous peoples, rebel returnees, solo parents, GASP, etc. Lahat yan, ang dami. So I was really like working a lot nung nasa CHED on scholarship. High pass yung scholarship na yan. And in terms of encouraging non-formal, informal, and indigenous learning systems, I think mas maganda rin yung nagawa natin. In fact, model tayo in terms of non-formal education. In terms of developing alternative learning system in Southeast Asia, ang ganda ng ating accreditation and equivalency. So ito nga yung sinusunod at tinitingnan ng ibang bansa sa region and the world. Kasi nagawa natin yung alternative learning system na pwede kang mag-move from formal to non-formal at an A&E equivalency program. Pero as I said, marami pa rin tayong out-of-school children. So ano pa yung kulang? Ano pa yung mga hindi natin nagagawa? And yung number 5, yung mga adult citizens, those with disabilities, and vocational efficiency. Ang daming nagagawa ng TESDA at ng mga batas. But as I said, in terms of goal setting, okay, pass. But implementation, because of the number of our out-of-school children and also the population and poverty that we're having, plus the pandemic, kulang at kulang kahit napakaganda ng batas natin, kulang pa rin sa implementation. So I think we should rethink and reimagine how we can make all of these goals relevant. So yun po yung pananaw ko doon. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ethel, and we appreciate that yung cross-country perspective that now you wear no, sa Simeo, mahalaga yan para maikumpara natin na maayos talaga. Nasaan na rin tayo. No? So at this point, we'll now call on our last to react for this question. Father June, tell us your insights po.
So I would say it's incomplete using a metaphor, no? I could not yet enjoy a symphony orchestra I appreciate and love to listen to, as I hear a lot of discord, squeaking notes, lack of harmony, synchronization of instruments under the baton of a masterful conductor. For that reason, I did the kind of an advocacy saying that technical vocational education in a seamless, trifocalized system of education. That has been my advocacy ever since I just started working in that area. So that we see the coordination of all the laws, not contradicting each other or in opposite or in conflict in its application. And then also the different initiative that really becomes dissonant, in the lack of harmony and synchronization under a masterful conductor. I think that's what we need. For that reason, it should be an integrated education system. Then there has been a lot of effort done by making education accessible to the citizen, but massification of education do not guarantee achievement of goals of education without quality assurance. Schools' failure to deliver quality education penalizes the child and imposes high costs on society to deal with the consequences of underrated education. Then there's a lot of leaks in the pipeline and the redirection of funds peppered with legal tapping of the resources of government to reach out to those who have less in life to make education inclusive. And as we subscribe to the advocacy of lifelong learning, there is need to commonly define and adopt the meaning of outcome as product of the different modes of learning in the formal, non-formal, informal modality acceptable to business and employing sector, not merely based on the scrutiny of the academic community. Because they only ask questions, who teaches that, what's the qualification of teacher, what are the instruments and the equipment they have, but not really saying what is the outcome. Then lifelong learning offers the possibility of multiple entry, multiple exit in the learning process through upskilling, reskilling, cross-skilling, multi-skilling. We don't need to complete the whole stretch of 4 or 5 year degree course to be productive and contribute our share to the local, national, international development.
Okay. Father June has offered to all of us this afternoon a very comprehensive view of where the gaps are in terms of implementation. And we are very thankful for the people who are sharing their insights over our chat room. But I think if we now look at very specific provisions of the 1987 Constitution relative to education, we'll see more color. And the first one that we will focus on is found in Section 4. And we would ask Father June and Carol to respond to this because it has something to do with the complementary roles of public and private institutions in the educational system. So for those of you who are looking at our screen right now, there is provision for complementarity, reasonable supervision, and regulation of educational institutions. So Michael, if you could just look at our scroll up to show that actual provision. We will now ask Father June and Mark, tell us your thoughts on whether we have matured well in terms of complementarity and what else can be done about this. Now, let's begin with Father June, who has worked in this area for quite some time now.
Yeah, the principle of complementarity of public and private education is enshrined in the Constitution. Yet the operationalization of the principle does not actualize and respect the spirit of the framers of our Constitution. Over the past several years, COCOPEA took lead role in pursuit of this advocacy. Private education institutions suffer the consequences of unjust provisions of the law and the various orders, memoranda, guidelines promulgated by the different regulatory education agencies. The skewed interpretation and implementation of laws inimical to the operation of private education impacts on the viability and sustainability of private education institutions in the country. And a very blatant example of this is the RA 10931, the universal access to quality tertiary education. Father Joel Tabora, then president of Cocopea at the height of the promulgation of the law, emphasized that to promote universal access simply by providing free education only in souks and looks was unrealistic and detrimental to the one Philippine system of education. It would overpopulate the souks and looks, militate against their quality, and adversely affect the private schools. Free education in souk alone would draw students away from private schools, which live on tuition and fees. Free education supported by the state would draw teachers away from private schools due to higher legislative wages of the public schools. Such a law destroys the complementarity of public and private schools, and this would be unconstitutional. And just recently, Cocopea sounded a clarion call to all national and local candidates to present a strong education agenda to the electorate. It continues to advocate that our education system needs a policy environment that is more developmental but less regulatory, one which allows educational institutions with administrative ease to follow necessary regulation, but with enough administrative space to self-government and adopt its own educational objectives. Ultimately, an education sector that's agile, innovative, resilient, benefits students in the continuity of quality learning in the nation's human capital development. With economic challenges in education exacerbated by pandemic, hundreds of private schools close. Students and teachers migrate to public schools, further weakening of private sector in education and crowding even more our public schools. Cocopea continues to reiterate strengthening the complementarity role of public and private education by tapping the strengths and resources of the private sector in easing the burden of our government schools to attain national education goals. This would also entail expanding, increasing, recalibrating government subsidy program for teachers and students in private school sector to raise quality and efficiency of the Philippine education system.
Okay. Father June, I think that's very much reflective of what has happened over the course of 35 years talaga, no, in terms of how we are seeing the provision of the state to both the public and the private education sector. Maybe now that we have been constantly listening on the ground, what has been happening, we'll ask Mark for his what he thinks can still be done in terms of this provision. Go ahead, Carol.
I think, Ed, we have to appreciate also that we are pioneering in the context of the world, no, in terms of private education systems, because we have one of the oldest and one of the most siguro deliberate or fleshed out policies governing the private education space compared to other systems. Be that as it may, the challenge that we face, I think, is really there's inconsistency in the understanding of what complementarity means, what an integrated system means. And I'll show you one example. In 1989, when GASPE was passed after the Free High School Act, the explanatory note for that law states that private schools are performing a very public function that is of the state, but because the state cannot do it, private schools should be supported and given every assistance they can get to be able to do this. That was 1989. But later on, in more recent years, when we were, for example, defending the budget of CHED in the House of Representatives, we would get a lot of questions from congressmen na, bakit ba natin tutulungan yung mga private? Private yan. And so yung pag-uunawa, hindi consistent, may nag-iiba, and we have to ask ourselves why that is the case and what safeguards we can put in place to make sure that the way by which government sees private education is consistent. Kasi pag maraming inconsistencies, ang hirap tumuloy ng long-term planning for an education system. We've also seen that in the recent policy, no, on taxation that was thankfully amended. Pero talagang yung stance between government and private ed, paiba-iba. Baka kailangan ayusin. In terms of what could be done, I think definitely a blueprint will help. For example, sa senior high school, matagal ng katanungan, ilang porsyento ba ng senior high school provision ay aakuin ng gobyerno at ilan dito yung private schools yung mag-run? May kasagutan na ba tayo dito? Pagdating sa higher education, ano ba yung diferensya ng trabaho ng SUC, ng LUC at ng mga private HEIs? Pwede kasi yan, kunyari, by discipline, no? All agricultural programs, let government invest in that. All engineering programs, ito naman. Pwedeng short-term programs, whether in the type, in the typology, or in the subject matter, pwedeng may mga ganung focus para yung investments natin mas malinaw para sa mga private entities. Pwedeng talaga nilang ibuhos yung pondo nila kasi alam nilang hindi mawawala yung mga estudyante in the future. Kailangan natin ng ganoong sigurong peace of mind for people so that our education system can really flourish in an integrated way. I think ikalawa, mahalaga yung scholarships natin can allow a student to choose a public or a private school wherever they want to go regardless of cost. Kasi ang mahirap pag may cap sa tuition, yes, pwede silang mag-attend sa private, pero indirectly you're telling them, doon ka na sa public or doon ka sa mas murang private. And so choice is not full. Choice is not there. Because what if yung best school na gusto mong puntahan sa engineering, hindi afford nung tuition cap na available sa scholarship mo. So that is not the real, I mean, we can do better in terms of student choice, I think, in that regard. And then ikatlo, in terms of scholarship grants or whatever grants given by government, dapat pantay ang pagtingin sa public at private institutions. Not even equal, maybe equitable, kung sino yung mas nangangailangan nito. And although CHED has a very strong and clear position on this, that yes, it wants to give to all, may mga COA bottlenecks na kailangan i-resolve para talagang maipagpatuloy ito nang wala ng problema in the future. So I think yung tatlong yun, pwede talagang gawin in the next 3 to 6 years. Sana mapagtuunan ng pansin.
Okay. Mark, ang powerful ng sinabi mo, no, yung power of choice, no, importante yan. Kung sana lang nabibigyan natin talaga ng ganap na kalayaang pumili ang mga mag-aaral. Kung maganda talaga yung nasa private school at na-establish natin yung niching, no, na sinasabi kanina, malayo-layo pa yung mararating natin. No? So, nakatutuwa dun sa ating chat room sa FB Live at saka dito sa Zoom. Some people are already making articulations of their insights. Salamat po, and please continue writing them down, and siguro in a little while, piliin natin iba doon na pwede pa nating pag-usapan. No? But for now, interesting din po yung susunod na provision natin. No? Yan naman po, papakinggan natin si Mark at saka si Diane at saka si Doc Ethel pala, no? Para makita natin naman, ito yung provision na dapat nakatuon sa regional and sectoral needs and conditions ang ating sistema ng edukasyon. So, kanina, ang dami nagko-comment, no? Ang dami nating plano, pero ano ba talaga yung nangyayari? And our speakers have articulated, we have some problems in terms of implementation. So, we will ask Diane, in PBED's analysis of the Philippine learning crisis, no? Could you tell us if we indeed have a comprehensive and relevant plan for education and development in the country? And then pagkatapos mo, we listen to Dr. Ethel to share what we can learn about educational planning in her work in the ASEAN and even beyond. So Diane, please go ahead.
Thanks, Ed. So we think that we have enough plans, pero tulad ng mga sa ibang sektor, no, nagkakaproblema talaga tayo sa implementation. So even though we have national plans and frameworks, the devil is in the details, and we know na it's not one size fits all. So nagkakaproblema tayo sa implementation, especially at the local levels. So for example, we see that education is still not decentralized. So the accountability of the local government units, wala masyado. Kasi DepEd naman and whatever effort I give, parang good job na sa akin yun kasi binigyan ko ng konting budget yung edukasyon sa bayan ko. Pero we also need to look at the special education fund na meron sila, na merong o hawak ng mga LGUs. With SEF, according to a DILG study, no, around or less than 70% lang ang utilization ng SEF. So and then sometimes or most of the time yung SEF hindi talaga siya nagagamit sa quality or mas malalim pang mga proyekto. At the same time, so meron din tayong Mandanas ruling. So magkakaroon ng 234 billion na pondo available for LGUs this year. Pero ang problema doon, even though we welcome this development, ang tanong, meron bang technical and absorptive capacity yung mga LGUs to spend this? Kasi yung SEF nga, hindi nila na utilize. What more pa itong billions of funds. So, yun. And at the same time, yung pangatlo, yung sa senior high school curriculum ng mga, lalo sa mga probinsya, hindi aligned sa provincial development plan. Diba? And at the same time, yung, kumbaga dapat yung edukasyon, employment, at saka investment, magkakasunod yan or they go hand in hand. Kasi dapat yung LGUs or yung provincial government, they generate jobs, but at the same time, they also train for the workforce of those jobs. Hindi lang, kumbaga hindi dapat segmented yung pagtingin. So we think that we have enough plans, pero nagkakaproblema talaga sa local implementation.
Okay, thank you, Faj, and for mentioning also that there's a lot to expect now in terms of what we will be putting as investments in education at dapat pagplanuhang mabuti kung paano yan gagamitin, no? So let's now hear from Dr. Ethel, who can share with us her observations relative to what the region and even beyond has been doing in terms of education planning. Dr. Ethel?
Sorry, we are closing our other session. Okay, thank you very much for the question. So ang ganda rin nung pag-uusapan natin when it comes to this particular provision in the Constitution. Kasi talagang dapat relevant sa regional and sectoral needs. And it's in 1987 Constitution. Pero ano ba yung question sa akin is, ano ba yung nakikita natin in the region? I mean, region is the ASEAN region and the global level in terms of planning, di ba? So, sinabi natin kanina na ang ganda ng ating goals, aspirations in the 1987 Constitution. And siguro lahat ng speakers nagko-comment about the implementation. One of the things na kailangan natin i-connect is the setting the goal and doing the plans. Dito tayo makakakita ng differences in terms of implementation in Southeast Asia or even beyond. So if we look at all of us, everyone today has heavy obligation to our children, to current and future generations. Malayo ang pagtingin, hindi lang yung ngayon ng mga bata, but future. Pero in terms of educational planning, many countries are going even up to 2050 in their educational planning. And nakikita natin yan, for example, in Malaysia, nagkaroon sila ng education blueprint that covers 2013 to 2035. In Simeo, we have 2015 to 2035. In Thailand, they have Thailand 4.0, transformative shift and priorities for innovation, economic priorities, social well-being, nandyan, and then raising human values, environmental protection, all in one. Brunei also, ginawa nila yung long-term planning, which they call as SPN 21, 21st century skills, ahead, hindi yung during short-term planning. Tayo, kasi yung sa Education for All, 2015 plan. So ginawa natin yan 2000 up to 2015, and I was the one who also did the assessment of paano tayo nag-implement, ano na-achieve natin in that sense. So may planning tayo nung Education for All. Ngayon, tingnan natin yung current. So meron tayong global social contract na bago. It's up to 2050. And all the global and regional planning like Simeo ASEAN, we do a lot of consultation and futures thinking and different sectors are involved. So laging meron kang roadmap. And kung titingnan natin sa Philippines, for example, hinahanap ko lagi yan sa class ko sa UP, my subject is educational planning. So tinitingnan namin yung TESDA plan, CHED plan, and also DepEd plan. So marami tayong agenda anchored on the Philippine Development Plan. Our Philippine Development Plan 2017 to 2022. So laging naka-anchor siya sa government priorities ng current president, right? So sabi natin doon, isang matatag, maginhawa, panatag na buhay para sa lahat. So, and then the DepEd will align the agenda, like Secretary Briones aligned the agenda to the agenda of DepEd. and supporting the past K-12 program and professionalizing teachers and nurturing DepEd community or ethos. So maganda kasi na-share ko sa inyo na ang mga ibang bansa, malayo ang planning system nila. So 20 or even up to 2050 na yung plans ng ibang advanced or developed economies. But we will wait again for the new president to have that portfolio of education agenda, anong gagawin niya. So ito yung siguro dapat rin nating i-improve na magkaroon tayo ng blueprint or roadmap for 30 years para doon i-align ng bawat gobyerno. Hindi yung bawat administration may sariling portfolio tapos pagdating ng iba na naman. So yung pananaw ng isang country, paano tayo magde-develop? Paano yung 4.0 goal natin? Paano yung innovation, STEM education? Yun as a country, kasi lahat tayo may responsibilidad. Hindi lang yun sa isang president na kasalalay. Dapat mas malawak yung ating pananaw. Yan yung nakita ko sa regional level na ginagawa namin, mas matagal yung planning system. Now, where of course, you have long-term plan, medium-term plan, and investment plan. And yung local government natin, meron tayong batas dyan, di ba? So we have RA 7160, Local Government Code, na meron tayong budget also for education na sinasabi nga natin. Ginagamit mostly yan for hiring teachers na ALS, Alternative Learning Teachers, yung hindi kaya ng budget ng DepEd. So nandun yung hiring of local teachers na tumutulong sa alternative learning system. At nandyan din yung nagbabudget din sila for yung ibang mga study visits or instructional materials or books. Subject to the provisions of the rules of COA. Kasi di ka basta-basta pwedeng bumili ng libro, may COA yan. So yan yung mga restrictions din when you come to local context. Kailangan lahat ipapa-approve yung mga choices mo. So in my sense, kasi being here at the regional level, tinitingnan ko lahat yung nangyayari sa global, regional, sa bawat bansa, and how we can benefit from all of this. So ina-anchor mo doon yung goals mo to what is needed by 2050. Long-term planning. Para yung science and technology natin, basic education, higher and TVET, will all be aligned. We will all be competitive at the end. So anyway, mahaba kasi it's a whole book on decentralization that we did. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ethel. No? Balikan lang natin si Fudge, si Diane. No? Meron kasing nag-comment dito kanina. Baka daw yung concern talaga natin sa planning, kasi yung view natin, and this was given by our colleague Jose L. Cuya, baka yun yung mali natin daw sa goal setting natin. If we are only setting the goal for educating our youth that they should land a good job after schooling, then ang goal lang natin talaga is to prepare workers, no? Natatandaan ko naging malaking issue to when we launched K-12 na parang people are against it kasi parang pinagpe-prepare lang tayo ng mga tao para sa para lumabas ng Philippines at magtrabaho na lang, no? Diane, what's your experience or view about this from your work from the ground? Tama ba to? Mali ba to? Ano sa tingin mo?
Thanks, Ed, and thanks to Sir JL, yung Jose, sa nag-comment. So I think kasi yung goal talaga ng education is to make the lives of people better and the nation be developed. So yung pagkakaroon ng trabaho, nandiyan talaga yan, hindi natin siya parang it's part of life na kailangan ang isang tao kailangan magkatrabaho at magkaroon ng business para maka-contribute sa national development. I think we need to balance quality of education, like yung civic education, di ba, na sabi nga ni Mark kanina, na dapat we're also promulgating critical thinking, di ba, value for the life of others. Yung mga yun, dapat, kumbaga nandun na yun, kumbaga encompassing na yun or nakapaloob na yun sa education system na binibigay natin. Siguro yung PBED bilang we're in a position na we're also the voice of the business sector. ang sinasabi ng business sector na kailangan included yung business sector when we educate the youth. Kasi yun nga, bottom line, it's for national development. I don't think na we need to choose between having a deeper level of education at saka magkakaroon ng trabaho. Kasi it should go hand in hand. Kahit may trabaho ka, if biktima ka ng disinformation or nagpapalaganap ka ng fake news, wala kang pagmamahal sa bansa, wala rin, di ba? It doesn't contribute to national development. So I think the goal of education is to improve human lives and at the same time develop our nation. So it goes hand in hand. Hindi tayo pwede mamili.
Well, thank you, Diane, for that input. No? And Sister Emelinda Correa Falsis actually supported and affirmed this observation that that direction towards educating people so that they could land good jobs, no, that's really there. But she also wants us to really adopt that long-term view of planning, no, so para mas sustainable. Now, speaking of how we get there, no, may nag-comment po sa FB Live, sabi po niya, si Professor Leonisa Del Rosario, sana mabago na ang kasabihan na nangyayari sa Pilipinas, bagong hari, bagong ugali, bagong pili. Baka naman kasi hindi bagong hari, baka dapat bagong reyna naman, no? So, biglang napaisip ang mga tao. Baka mali kasi. Okay, sige. Anyway, we don't want to add to that conversation. Parating po yan sa episode 2, no? But now, we'll move on to another contentious part of the discussion about education and development, no? And this time, babalikan natin si Diane at saka si Carol. Kasi towards the end of Section 5 of the Constitution, nabanggit doon kung sino talaga yung key player in all of this, no? So, sabi dyan, enhancing the right of teachers to professional advancement and the protection of non-teaching academic and non-academic personnel. So, tatanungin natin si Carol. Si Carol po kasi, ang dami niya ng research and policy development work concerning teacher education, training, and development. So tatanungin natin siya, may kulang pa ba at saan tayo talaga nagkukulang? And after this, si Dayan naman ang tanungin natin kasi gusto nating ipaliwanag niya yung recent legislative initiatives where PBED has been part of in order to address the teacher quality issue. Okay? So, Carol, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ed, for this question. No? And talagang malaki yung role na piniplay ng mga teachers natin. In the first EdCom, ang nakalagay sa chapter doon is, at the heart of the problem is the teacher.
The teacher.
And actually, if you look at all the studies around the world, no, in terms of mga randomized control trial, all of those things, the best investment you can make is on your teacher. So kung mag-build ka ng classrooms, magpapaganda ka ng facilities, that is all secondary to having a good teacher in the classroom. Kasi yung good teacher kayang mag-adapt, kayang kung ano man ang resources na may kulang, kaya niyang gawa ng paraan, talagang may capacity siya to change the situation, the learning. Kasi yun yung agent of change mo in the classroom, a student and the learner. Yun talaga yung interaction. In our country, kita natin talagang mababa ang licensure exam passing rates. Average of about 30% tayo for the past decade. And that's a big problem. I think the current initiative to attract the best in the profession is really the first step. Pero yung ikalawa doon, kailangan ma-nurture at ma-keep sila sa profession. Kasi kung magpa-parachute ka ng mga galing na teachers tapos hindi sila gusto ng mga dadatnan nila sa sistema, magiging problema yon. So kailangan talagang ma-mainstream sila into the system and that they stay. So dapat may incentives in place. Ikalawa, kailangan ipasara ang mga diploma mills. Kasi marami talaga tayong schools na ilang taon na, dekada na ang nakaraan, 0 to 25% ang average passing rate. Bakit pa sila nandyan? Kailangan tutukan. Region 8, 9, 12 at BARM, karamihan ng mga schools na to, yung mga teacher education institutions, kailangan bantayan. Sa akin, isa pang kailangan natin gawin, and Ed would know this because si Ed bahagi ng technical panel for teacher education, kailangan mas practice-oriented ang teaching. Kasi ang teaching, hindi naman siya, i-memorize mo yung theory, i-memorize mo yung pedagogy, kaya mo nang gawin. Kailangan mas marami tayong practice. Kasi in other countries, in the best education systems, what we've seen is, simula first year pa lang, may practice teaching na siya, padami ng padami yung units hanggang fourth year. Sa atin, nung kinompute ko, parang 12 units lang yung total na field work, or I may be mistaken, but it is very minimal compared to the best practice around the world. Ang kwento pa sa atin ng mga ibang teachers, yung mga nag-pre-service teaching, pagpunta daw nila ng school para mag-practicum or mag-field work, ginagawa silang substitute teacher. Yung teacher na kaysa i-mentor siya, bigyan siya ng feedback o mag-co-teach kasama niya, iiwanan siya para magawa ng ibang trabaho. Hindi sana ganun, kasi yung learning ng teaching para siyang doktor, parang residency program, kailangan meron kang naggagabay sa'yo para talagang natututunan mo kung paano makapagturo ng mahusay. And siguro yung huli, yung ecosystem, parang may triangle siya, no, na parang nandito yung Ministry of DepEd, for example, nandito yung teacher education institutions, tapos nandito yung mga schools natin, whether public or private. Dapat nagkadikit. Sa policy lingo, para siyang tighter coupling of these three institutions, these three entities. For example, in other countries, pwedeng i-second yung mga nasa Ministry of Education, yung mga nasa DepEd, i-second to schools. At yung mga teachers, pwedeng i-second to DepEd para yung pananaw ng polisiya nakakarating talaga doon sa ground, naiintindihan nila para talagang grounded yung mga recommendations sa policy, at yung mga teachers talagang may first-hand input in policy making. Tapos sa ibang bansa, hindi gumagawa ng proyekto or merong quality interventions, no? Hindi yung ginagawa ng walang solid research in tandem with teacher education institutions, at pag in-implement yun, talagang may M&E na kasama yung teacher education institutions. So yung growth ng sector mo, tulungan yung tatlong sektor na to, hindi hiwa-hiwalay, kasi minsan in parallel tayo nag-work, no? May ibang research ginagawa yung TEI, hindi naman talaga nakadikit sa ginagawa nung sa DepEd. Tapos yung mga schools natin, minsan hindi talaga may direct say sa research na ginagawa sa mga TEIs or sa mga polisiya. So I think yung pagdidikit ng tatlong entities na to mahalaga para magtagumpay tayo in terms of teacher quality.
Naku, Mark, Carlo, parang nabuhayan ng dugo yung sa chatroom natin, no? Parang may revolusyon na nangyayari sa FB Live at saka sa Zoom chatroom natin. No? Talaga namang bilang 90% ng attendees natin ngayon ay talaga namang mga classroom teachers. No? Sana po ay, ayan, sabi ni Elisa Gomba, we are triggered. So, malalaki yung provisions yung proposals na binigay ni Mark. No? Pero baka kaabang-abang din, tanungin natin si Dayan kasi merong mga exciting na advocacies ang PIBED na sana maisama naman sa agenda, no, ng pagpapalakas pa ng kaguruan sa ating bansa. So Dayan, please go ahead.
Thanks, Ed. I totally agree with Mark. Siguro before I identify yung mga polisiya o programa that we are pushing for, ikwento ko muna yung scholarship program namin that started in 2009. So yun nga, we wanted to attract the best and the brightest into the teaching profession. Kasi even yung sa study ng PISA, no, yung mga high performer natin ayaw mag-teacher. So, alam natin to, may mga nagsasabi, di ba, anong course mo? Tapos may yung bata sasabihin, teacher na lang. Well, it shouldn't be the case, di ba? So, there's a perception problem. So, we want to attract the best and the brightest into the teaching profession, at the same time, train them into with the best universities. So, more than 10 years after, fast forward, nagkaroon kami ng mga learnings from this program, and we demonstrated that it can be done, at yung mga produkto ng scholarship program na to are performing well in their respective classrooms. That's why when we worked with the Congress for the Teacher Excellence Bill, or Teacher Excellence Act, inilagay namin itong provision na to, or inilaban namin itong provision na to na magkaroon ng national scholarship program for teachers. So ito, libreng tuition, may dorm, clothing allowance, sagot pati licensure examination fees, review fees, and at kapag graduate sila, automatic yung sweldo nila sa DepEd guaranteed, or their hiring guaranteed sa DepEd. So aside from attracting the best and the brightest, we also need to retain, sabi nga ni Mark. So aside from parang having direct access na, kasi nag-invest na yung gobyerno sa kanila, di ba? So dapat talagang mag-serve sila sa public schools. We also need to train them, and yung nga, ma-socialize sila with the other teachers. Kumbaga, maapektuhan nila or ma-revive or ma-reinvigorate nila yung buong bureaucracia, no? To be better teachers. And at the same time, kailangan din natin sila bigyan ng better environment para hindi sila umalis kasi sayang naman. At etong mga to, they're very idealistic, they're very passionate, and lahat sila mga para sa bayan. And once na disillusion sila or na panghinaan sila ng loob, it's really difficult. Another policy push that we're considering is an assessment agency, or the establishment of an independent assessment agency. Hindi ito directly related for teacher quality, pero ito yung magiging daan para makita natin o ma-monitor natin ano yung epekto ng ating mga guro dun sa learning gains o dun sa performance ng ating mga bata. Because right now, yung DepEd na nagpro-provide ng edukasyon, sila din po yung nag-a-assess ng same service that they're providing. So we want an independent assessment agency that can really focus on this nationwide, at hindi lang sa DepEd, even hanggang TECVOC, hanggang college, to really see if tama ba yung interventions natin, not just on teacher quality, but also in the other aspects of education. So, yun. At yung Teacher Education Excellence Bill, yun nga, as I've mentioned a while ago, ratified na siya sa Kongreso, and in less than 30 days, if hindi pa siya mapirmahan ng Presidente, magiging batas na siya. So, yun. Good news para sa mga gusto maging teachers.
Alam mo, nakakatuwa yan, Dayan, at sana nga yan yung isa sa mga mahalagang batas na dapat maipasa na natin. No? So sama-sama po tayong magdasal bukod pa sa mapayapa at maayos na eleksyon. So doon sa sinabi ni Carol at saka ni Dayan, tingnan nyo, no? Ang powerful po kasi ng statement na kapag nag-invest tayo ng tama sa guro at magiging guro, marami tayong masosolve na issue. No? Pero ang dami rin kasi nating dapat na baguhing disposisyon tungkol dun sa disiplina ng pagtuturo. Kaya alam niyo, natawa ko dun sa sinabi ni Jeffrey Beltran sa ating chatroom. Kahit nga daw yung ibig sabihin ng LPT na dati ay Licensed Professional Teachers, ang naiisip lang naman ng mga tao doon ay lang pera sa teaching. So, huwag ka pumunta sa teaching, mahihirapan ka. So, pati yun, no, yung regard for the teaching profession, dapat mabago rin natin yan. No? At nakatutuwa po na marami naman na tayong na nagawa dyan, pero yung tututukan natin talaga yung kalidad ng mga gurong sinasanay natin. Gaya nga ng sinasabi namin sa National Teachers College, they have to become scholars of practice. No? Sige. So, pagpatuloy natin, yes, Mark. Carol. Yes,
I'll add lang, no, and I'm seeing it in the chat group. Mahalaga din talaga na yung investments na ginagawa natin para sa mga teachers sa basic ed institutions, hindi lamang para sa public schools, pero sa mga private schools. Kasi guro din natin ito. So kung meron tayong scholarships para sa public school teachers, sana may private school teacher scholarships din tayo. Kung meron tayong incentives para sa public school teachers, sana ganun din sa private schools. Kasi bahagi ito ng integrated system of education that includes public and private institutions.
Kaya nga, Mark, nung narinig nila yung National Educators Academy of the Philippines Transformation Agenda, NAEAP Transformation Agenda, ang sagot agad ng mga teachers sa private school, sana all. Kasi parang yung definition ng National Educators Academy, naiwan lang sa public school. Samantalang malaki rin yung number ng private school teachers natin.
Kasi alalahanin natin, no, na secondary education is a government responsibility that the private schools are taking part of. And so, babalikan ko yung sa GASPE, government should support the provision, especially of elementary and secondary provision that is of quality, because that is a government responsibility.
Yeah. At yaman din lamang pinag-usap natin yung investments at budget na yan, no? Tama-tama, itong si Carol, matagal yan sa government and he understands how we are spending in education. And so is Dr. Ethel. No? So if we look at the final provision in Section 5 of the Constitution, nakalagay doon, we need to assign the highest budgetary priority to education and ensure that teaching will attract and retain its rightful share of the best available talents. Yun yung sinasabi ni Dayan kanina, no? So we will ask at this point, Dr. Valenzuela, on what she has seen as trends in government investments in education and the quality and impact of changes that have happened as an outcome of those investments. Tapos, after she discusses these things, we listen to Mark based on his work both in the public and private sectors. If, simple lang naman, are we really making the right investments? Okay, so Dr. Ethel, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Ang napakaganda ng diskusyon natin, no? Nakakatuwa and nag-join din ang ating audience. So yung question natin on section 5 on the highest budgetary priority to education. I think we have good news kasi sa next year, as I see it, we will have a bigger budget in education. In fact, they say it's the biggest budget in education. So tama ba na good news yan? So in 2021, maganda rin ang allocation ng Philippines in education, approximately 720 billion as reported. And mas tumaas pa rin ito sa dati. So pag sinasabi natin ang laki pala ng pera na ina-allocate for education. And right now, it's still the biggest allocation by our government. But the major concern here is not the public expenditures in education, di ba? At nakikita natin pa rin yung education inequality. So pag titingnan, kasi gusto nyo malaman from Southeast Asia, right? I mean Bangkok. Mas malaki yung budget allocated in education ng Southeast Asian countries like Singapore, of course, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam. Mas malaki pa rin yung ina-allocate nilang budget in education than the Philippines. But although we said na lumaki na o tumaas na yung budget in education, pero hindi pa rin siya yung competitive in terms of Southeast Asian allocation for education budget. Kasi mas mataas pa rin yung allocation ng ibang bansa. They really invest on educational programs and quality of teachers. They get teachers with higher pay, of course, than us. Even here in Thailand, there are many Filipino teachers. So tataka ko, bakit ang daming teachers dito? Because Thailand also pays higher sa teachers than in our country. So yun yung titingnan natin ng mga issues na dapat i-improve natin while we have the budget for education. So hindi siya competitive, kaya maraming teachers that go overseas to teach or even become domestic helpers. So nakikita natin kasi many of us, we are all teachers, we love teaching, pero yung iba yung kanilang priority is helping their family. So they go overseas to teach or to do other jobs. So nakikita natin, ang laki pala ng budget, but ano pa itong mga issues natin on inequality, kasi kailangan access and equity in education. We still have poorest of the poor not in school, and those richest will likely finish schooling. Tapos marami pa rin tayong mga boys. Mas problema natin sa Philippines yung mga boys na hindi pumapasok and they're working and not going to school. So yung mga problema natin talaga is really embedded on perhaps yung poverty situation, and that's why kung titingnan natin lahat, we are lagging in the region in terms of performance in education. Kasi ang daming factors na dapat i-consider. So even we have bigger budget, paano nakakarating yan sa far-flung island provinces? Paano nakakarating yan? Ang daming dadaanan. And there are also so many rules on your textbook, on everything. So we have increased funding. Definitely, we have increased the funding. That is good. But we should also improve other aspects para magkaroon tayo ng better quality of education. Budget execution in a timely manner. So yung mga principals, diba, they do their own plans. So school improvement plan. And they have certain budget. Na dapat i-reimburse mo na yon, and then you get another chunk. So ang daming mga processes na pinagdadaanan. So kailangan din natin reviewin yung process, how the big funds go to the smallest and the farthest school. So yung mga last mile schools natin or last mile learners, ito yung dapat nating tingnan. And of course, on the benefits and reward remunerations of teachers, i-benchmark din natin siya in other countries, even in Southeast Asia. Why are the teachers from other region better paid than us? So isang mahirap na sagot yan, pero baka marami din tayong solusyon na pwedeng mapag-usapan as educators and as a country. So we are doing great na. Mataas na, number 1, ang budget in education. Implementation na lang, allocation, and reaching the farthest. The teachers, you know, yung teacher allocation natin, ayaw ng ibang teachers pumunta sa malalayong lugar. Kaya nagkukulang tayo at multigrade, 7,000 plus multigrade schools. So, and then sa higher education, ganun din. Sa CHED, di ba? Marami din tayong problema na walang mga accreditation of Center of Excellence. Tapos pag wala kang COE or COD, ilang percent lang yung meron nun. So, nahihirapan talaga in terms of getting faculty and in terms of getting benefits from CHED. Lagi ang mga support ng CHED, COE, COD, at you know, more of those higher level of institutions. But ilang porsyento yun? Maybe not even 20% lang of the 2,700 HEIs. So, ang dami nating dapat isipin. At ang dapat dito talaga is a big planning session, a framework that will lead us to 2050, addressing yung salaries ng teachers at the same time, titingnan mo rin yung mga backlogs, tsaka yung mga baggages ng mga teachers. And kailangan natin isa pang session dito, Doc Ed.
And I think that education planning session will feature you again. So, by the way, Dr. Ethel, no, before we call on Mark, no, since binanggit niyo na po yung mga centers of development and excellence natin, no, so we are very fortunate kasi nasa audience din natin ngayon yung mga heads of institutions ng Centers of Development and Excellence in Teacher Education, no? So maraming salamat po for joining us this afternoon. And I will need to make a special call out to the FINMA University of Iloilo. Nandito po ang kanilang teacher education faculty at saka po yung mga soon-to-be teachers nila. So I think this is a very good opportunity for them to understand the issues confronting our sector. So balikan natin si Carol ngayon kasi yan, nakasama na po yan sa lahat ng mga madugong debate sa budget sa edukasyon. No? So Carol, please go ahead.
At sa teacher education kasi madugo din ang mga conversation sa teacher ed, as Ed would know. But before I jump into the budget discussion, maganda kasi yung point ni Ethel about the COEs and CODs. Baka especially for teacher education, instead of waiting for schools to reach COE, COD status, we proactively search for them and support them to reach that status. Kasi sila yung kailangan natin para yung quality teaching talagang mangyari sa lahat ng lugar sa Pilipinas, hindi lamang sa mga lugar na kaya ng mga schools maabot agad yung standard na ito. So dapat proactive searching, proactive building up and enabling them to reach the status. In terms of budget, tama yung sinabi ni Ethel. We have to give ourselves naman we have to take pride in what we've achieved. Our budget for education has increased significantly for the past 10 years. And ngayon talagang mataas siya. And makikita mo naman sa trends din natin, tuwing nagkakaroon tayo ng extra funds, talagang naglalaan din naman sa education. Pero kulang pa din. Kasi yung spending natin, 2 to 2.3% of GDP, pero sa ibang bansa sa ASEAN, mga nasa 4 to 5%. So kailangan doblehin pa. Pero nabanggit din yung Ethel kanina, budget execution. Kasi hindi sapat na mataas yung budget mo, dapat utilization, nagagastos mo siya. In the past, I checked data from 2015 to 2019 and nag-improve naman tayo from about 80% utilization rate, this is for DepEd, no, to 90%. Pero bagamat 90% yun, yung natirang pondo pa rin, for example, I think that was 2019, was 30 billion. And that is enough to fund an entire agency. And so dapat, bagamat improve na tayo, malaki na yung na-improve natin, maganda na yun, pero malaki pa rin yung pondong pwedeng ilaan sa magagandang priorities na makabubuti ng education sector. So, kailangan pag-isipan natin yun. I think for basic education, given naman na talagang dapat pondohan ang teachers, teacher quality, at ang technology, especially in light of the pandemic. Hindi lamang pandemic, no? Tuwing nagkakabagyo, kung may technology ka in place, yung disruption in classes mo minimize. So, yung access to technologies, access to learning ang ibig sabihin yan. Kasi ang daming resources online na pwedeng gamitin ng mga kabataan para matuto. Pero I think I want to highlight the importance of funding two other things. And one is early childhood education. Babalikan ko yung experience ko before on ECCD and the Early Years Act. Alam mo, in the Philippines, pre-kinder access is less than 20% across socio-economic quintiles. Konting-konti ang nagkakaroon ng access sa pre-kinder education. And mahalaga ito because all of literature tells us that if your foundational years of 0 to 4, 0 to 5 is not there, wala kang parang foundation mo yan eh. Wala kang pagbibuildan sa taas niyan. And cognitive learning depends significantly on those early years and whether yung child rearing, yung pagkatuto ng bata na simulan ng maayos sa mga edad na yan. Currently, hindi pa buo ang sistema na yan. Currently, I'm doing a research with several colleagues, and pag minap out mo yung pondo pagdating sa early childhood care and development, hindi mo mapagdidikit-dikit. Nabanggit kanina ni Faj yung sa SEF. SEF, even if you try to look for the funds, naka-aggregate siya, education and sports. Paano mo itatrack ang spending sa, di ba? Kasi may sports ka na, tapos nandiyan pa yung school building facilities, nandiyan yung mga gymnasium. Paano mo malalaman magkano ba ang inilaan sa early childhood education, sa mga daycare centers, sa sweldo ng daycare workers natin, hindi mo makikita. And bagamat maraming batas tulad ng First 1,000 Days Law, Breastfeeding Act, nandiyan yung Early Years Act, 7 national agencies coordinate to make that happen. And those of us who worked in government, Ethel would know, and a lot of us have experience working with government, bringing 2 agencies is hard, bringing 7 agencies, impossible, or maybe does not happen. And kailangan pagtuunan ng pansin yan. And that is also within the oversight power of the legislative body, no? Nasa Congress dapat kumpuniin magkano ba talaga yung pondong napupunta sa early childhood education. Kasi kung hindi tayo nag-i-invest sa 0 to 5, kahit lahat ng investments natin later on, sayang lang. Kasi walang pagbibildan. Kulang yung pundasyon. Dapat ayusin natin yun. Sa higher education, syempre, hindi natin pwedeng kalimutan ng higher ed. Bahala na si Father June sa tech book later sa kailangang investment sa tech book. Ang dami ko kasi sasabihin masyado. Pagdating sa higher ed, definitely yung faculty development, kailangan i-sustain yung investment sa faculty development. Tapos 2 streams, kailangan magsangay. Pag sinabi natin investment sa higher education, hindi pwedeng isang pondo, lahat, pag-agawan nyo na yan, hindi pwedeng ganun. Dapat yung mga community colleges, smaller colleges and universities, tulungan natin makapag-innovate, kunyari short-term degrees, yung mga kayang sumunod agad sa pangangailangan ng local communities nila. Kasi yun naman yung kaya nila talagang gawin kumpara sa mga research comprehensive universities. Pagdating sa mga big universities natin, ang mga flagship national universities, kailangan buhusan ng pondo ang R&D para makapag-innovate, makapag-push ng frontiers in terms of knowledge generation, at makapag-build ng excellent graduate programs. Alam mo, hindi sexy pakinggan ang graduate education programs, pero ito talaga din yung core. Kasi kung wala kang excellent graduate programs, magpa-scholarship ka man sa mga ongoing teachers natin, pero nakapag-enroll sila, teacher ed master's programs, hindi good quality, sayang ang investments. May degree pero wala talagang natutunan. Yung graduate ed programs natin, and there was a task force who worked on this, reviewing the graduate education programs in the country, talagang more of the same of college education. At kailangan talagang reformahin pa ito, buhusan ng pondo para taasan yung kalidad, para transformative siya in terms of what graduate education completers, finishers, graduates can do and apply in their own work afterwards. So sana yun yung pagtuunan ng pansin.
Carol and Diane, while you were talking, no, sabi ni Ramil D. Chua na taga DepEd, ito babasahin ko verbatim. If everyone wants this discussion not to be futile, magandang gumawa po kayo ng policy recommendation or attend kayo ng education forum. It is best for our leaders, especially yung susunod ng mga education leaders, to hear these messages. No? So Sir Ramil, this is precisely the reason we're convening the first episode. We are gathering everything that's written in the chat room, in FB Live, and of course, our ongoing discussion, because we are preparing some form of an education and development agenda na dapat nating pag-usapan as we are trying to select our new leaders. No? So mula sa budget, mula sa teacher, pag-usapan natin ngayon yung isa pang magandang provision ng education section ng 1987 Constitution. No? Ito po yung nasa section 7. And here, what we're trying to look at is something that I know Father June and Diane can respond to. This section particularly, siguro Michael, pwede nating i-disable yung annotation. I-clear na lang natin lahat, no? We have to understand that there is an explicit statement there that establishes the relationship of our official and regional languages insofar as communication and instruction are concerned, no? So ito naman usapin ng wika sa edukasyon, no? We'll ask Father June because in his work in basic education, higher education, and technical vocational education, there is this focus on enhancing English skills, no? It has always been there, and it's always anchored on two major reasons. Tataas daw ang employability pagka English, and of course, our global competitiveness. We will ask Father June's assessment. Nag-succeed po ba talaga tayo in this area? And then we will ask Dayan thereafter kasi they have another work stream in PBED that talks about the language of learning. No? Sige po, Father June, please go ahead and share with us your insights. By the way, for the information of everyone, Father June is also a language and literature teacher. Okay, Father June?
Yeah. Of course, it begins with the language policy of the country, no? And there seems to be a lot of issue regarding that. The mother tongue and the multilingual education approach that we use in the education of language and basic education. And a lot of things has to be discussed, the implementation of that, and actually the result of that process. That's why we have this lack of competency of our students in the basic education, manifested by all this international standing that we have, that we are last in grading, and also in many aspects already bloated already, this kind of information. But I'd like to go back to our experience when we were trying to identify the use of language in the different maybe career track that we have. No? In the 2010 and 2011, there was a great demand for employment for business processing outsourcing, no? The BPO. And I think we started there because there was a demand, big demand of employment. We were at once presented with a big demand of 1.3 million employees at that moment. We need these people to man the call centers. And the first requisite is that you know how to speak English and speak well and communicate in English. And because that is the clientele that we need to serve. No? And so we tried to make a study and try to see how it's the capability of all those students who will take up this kind of training. And we have, hired the UP Statistical Center to do the study under Dr. Zoe de Rivera. No? And she tried to analyze the situation of those taking the course. And they found out this kind of information that maybe there's a lack of proficiency of our student in terms of English proficiency, okay? And therefore the communication and being identified and they're only performing at about 47%. And you will see how important this is in terms of doing tasks of the BPO. And so there is already identified that our students lack this proficiency in terms of environment, environment of work. No? And it continues even up to now, no? That kind of identification because of this kind of, implementation of the MVP language, multi-language approach that understood by the teacher or even not implemented well. And now we also have this one, another information, no? That when we look at the English Proficiency Index, okay, we would note that there is this information. We are second in proficiency out of the 24, and we are 18th ranked in 112 countries. So parang ibang information na naman, no? Parang they don't jive. While there is the identification of the lack of competency of our students in terms of the facility of language, there is this kind of English proficiency index at the Asian level. We had the second, and at the world level with the 18 out of 112. And therefore, we are perceived to be a good speaker of English, but when we are tested in terms of our competency, we fail. No? And I think these are the things that we would need to see and study very well. That's why I asked our different institutions. So I interviewed before I came, trying to prepare for this. I went to ask the PNU. Do you know the profile of student entering higher education in terms of the competency in communication? I asked Santo Tomas, do you have a kind of profile that will tell me what is the proficiency of student trying to enter higher education? And I asked De La Salle, and I asked this Santo Tomas UP and PNU, because these are my connection in terms of language learning, teaching. And therefore they say they don't have. None of them have the kind of profile. And I was informed that this one, CHED now took a resolution that they would try to implement and assess the entry of students in terms of language competency by having this
CFR, Father.
Model of trying to assess language.
Yes.
I think Ed Fermin knows that. They would try to see the B1 and B2 level of assessment of students,
Yes,
so that we can really identify what in the profile of our student we need to see that can really prepare them to be, they're able to do the work at that level requiring English proficiency. So I think this is one big area that needs to be identified, needs to be pointed out, what have to be worked on, not just study that receiving all this data, but actually we don't manifest them. So I think this is one great area that we need to look into. And I think the suggestion of having all college students be assessed by that assessment of the B1 and B2 level and try to see how this higher education can address this deficiency in communication in English.
Yeah. Thank you, Father June. And I very much appreciated po that you tried to look at the indicators coming from the recent international assessments and then the EPI or the English Proficiency Index. Parang conflicting kasi Father June yung sinasabi nila, no? But let's hear from Dayan, because I think PBED has been working on a lot of things about the dimension of language and its impact on the quality of our education. No? So Dayan, please, I would love to hear your thoughts.
I agree with Father June, no, na there are mixed results of different studies, pero madami pang kulang na data. But we have to also recognize that mother tongue is the foundation of having good English competency. So, sabi nga ni Decker, MPBMLE promotes cognitive development and higher order thinking skills. So, imagine yung bata, if hindi siya natuto sa language na kanyang kinalakihan o ginagamit sa bahay, mahihirapan siya to adjust to another language kasi nga hindi solid yung foundation niya. But as I've mentioned, kulang pa sa study kasi even in the education sector, mixed and even in the Congress, mixed yung thoughts ng ating mga mambabatas if we should really continue MPBMLE. Pero kasi ang reality sa classroom na yung weak implementation of MP or mother tongue contributes to the weak comprehension of L2, which is English or Filipino kung from the provinces yung mga bata. That's why ang gusto pang i-push ng PBED is more siguro scaled up action research by the regions and provinces. And kailangan kasi kumbaga theoretically okay yung mother tongue. Pero alam natin na sa implementation tayo nagkakaproblema. So dapat ayusin natin yung implementation para makita natin yung totoong benefits ng MPBMLE. So for example, sa Bicol, okay siya. Governor Salceda mentioned na gusto niyang ituloy. Pero sa Baguio, hindi. Kasi, for example, ang dami ring nuances ng language ng mga katutubo, di ba? So yung mga ganon. And while we recognize na hindi siya one size fits all, mas kailangan pa natin pag-aralan. But at the same time, kumbaga, getting our skin in the game already. Another factor that we should also consider, yung early childhood at elementary education teachers natin, hindi sila trained para magturo ng mother tongue dun sa mga respective subjects nila. Kasi yung curriculum natin sa college, mostly English. Tapos, kanina napag-usapan natin yung centers of excellence. I agree na dapat proactive yung pag-establish natin ng mga COEs. Kasi dun pa lang, especially for teaching, no? Kasi dun pa lang, dun sa region na yun o sa probinsya na yun, if may COE tayo na makapag-focus sa pagtuturo ng MT dun sa ating mga future teachers, diba, masosolve natin yung isang problema ng implementasyon ng mother tongue. So, madaming kabit-kabit na mga factors na kailangan pag-aralan. So, yun sana yung mas pagtuunan natin ng pansin. And sorry, kanina you mentioned sa comment na may nag-comment na yun nga, dapat we are putting this into writing and advocating this sa mga susunod na administrasyon. Promote ko lang, Edna. We also have Education Nation, and actually Father June and Mark is a part of Education Nation, and si Doc Ethel will also have to invite her, no? Pero yun nga, we want, itong Education Nation is a coalition that puts forward an education agenda, and we use and if you can also look at our Eduk naman page, FB page, na we are advocating for the election of an education president. Now we want the voters to really look at the education platform of our candidates, and at the same time also putting forward kung ano dapat yung mga dapat nilang gawin at tulungan natin sila kapag na-elect na sila. Thanks, Ed.
Okay. Thank you, Diane. Just to let you know, since Diane and PBED, of course, are our partner for this webinar series, no? Abangan niyo po yung episode 2 kasi sa episode 2 po, pag-uusapan natin who the education president is, no? Sundan niyo po yung page ng PBED. Nandun na po kasi yung initial findings sila or analysis, no? Plataforma sa edukasyon ng mga kandidato natin sa pagkapangulo. You know, we have a lot of other issues in the education provisions of the Constitution. I will skip some of them, but not the items here that I think everyone should hear about, no? So I hope that's okay also with our panelists, no? So let's move straight to the next item here, which I would like Dr. Ethel and Father June to respond to. Ito po yung may kinalaman dun sa Section 10 provision on the need to focus on science and technology, considering the National Development and Progress Agenda. So si Doc Ethel po kasi kanina binanggit niya na, no, sa ASEAN malaki na mataas na ang consciousness for STEM. So we'll ask her what her assessment of our overall current science and technology and STEM education context of our country relative to our regional and global trends. After niya po, we will ask Father June to share with us his work and his insights on what can be done to make that culture of STEM education work better in the Philippines. At masusurprise po kayo, parte ng diskurso ng STEM education ang technical vocational education. So let's now listen to Dr. Ethel, and after her is Father June. Dr. Ethel?
Thank you very much, Doc Ed. So yes, for CMEO, we have 10 centers on science and mathematics. And in fact, we have a CMEO Center for STEM education. So even before this forum, a decade ago or more for other countries, they have already strengthened 21st century curriculum and STEM education as an approach. So kasama na yan sa lahat ng changes na nangyari over the last 10 years. All countries in the region have adopted 21st century skills, STEM education in response to, Industry 4.0 and the need to look at the industry needs, etc. In our own country, we have also learned that NEDA has this harmonized national research and development agenda, and that encompasses, having a look at the research agenda in health, agriculture, aquatic natural resources, even DRRM, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and integrated basic research. So pag titingnan natin yung curriculum in Southeast Asia, lahat halos merong STEM education and meron ng 21st century skills, problem-solving skills, and higher order thinking skills. Lahat yan na-integrate sa curriculum, including our own K-12. But titingnan ko ngayon dito, bakit nga ba ganun yung pananaw natin na parang laging behind tayo, no? But among yung recent study about digital skills among APEC economies and using 134 country survey, yung discussion namin the other day in Singapore is that Chinese Taipei, Brunei Darussalam, and Philippines have the highest proportion of IT graduates. In fact, nagsusupply tayo ng mga IT graduates not only in Southeast Asia, but in the world, right? So hindi ko na sabihin sino mga countries ang maraming IT Filipino workers. So nakikita natin, marami rin pala. But in terms of digital competitive advantage, of course, Singapore is number 1, Chinese Taipei or Taiwan, the United States, and China. So marami silang engineers and scientists, and they have done a lot of STEM studies. Ito yung kulang natin kasi yung sa STEM ed research, and nakita rin natin paano ba ginagawa ng other countries, ano yung approach nila sa STEM education. Kasi for example, it's a whole of nation model, whole of nation approach that STEM education is actually linked to their economic model, to their economic development. Anong industries yung i-emphasize? Is it agriculture? Is it light industry? Advanced industry? So ayaw kasi nila na merong imbalance dito. Kailangan nakalink yung education to what the global labor markets and economies need. So kailangan sinusupply mo yung mga kailangan ng mga industries. Yan dapat na yung graduates natin, they are not being retrained again in the job employability studies that I did for the Philippines. So after 6 months pa or 9 months pa sila makakahanap ng trabaho. And what usually happens, nire-retool or nire-retrain na naman ng mga industries yung ating mga graduates. So marami tayong dapat i-improve. Meron din tayong nakita na lahat naman pala ng bansa with STEM education emphasis, but others are giving more budget to STEM education. And kung makikita natin is really investing on science and mathematics teachers. So mababanggit ko na naman, yung performance natin in teams or in international examination where we are not really having a high rank in that, and our scores are actually lower in both mathematics and science assessment. So ang kailangan natin ngayon for the 21st century is more people with problem-solving skills, number 1 requirement ng workforce, and also communication skills and critical thinking. So yun, i-focus natin yon so that our kids, our children, our graduates in higher education will be more employable at itong critical thinking, communication, teamwork, creativity will just be part of, parang ordinary na sa kanila yan. So they can work in regional, global, and at the national level, they will contribute to our country. So Malaysia, they have been focusing on this STEM education ever since. Brunei, and yung curriculum talaga problem-based learning based on all of their initiatives na kailangan problem solvers. So I think the Philippines, in terms of global competitiveness report, we a bit slip in 7 spots. So kailangan natin ibalik na graduates natin are competitive, especially looking at innovation, science, and technology. And there are already many studies that tell us saan tayo mahina. Ang kailangan natin gawin, paano tayo lalakas in terms of STEM education, innovation, research. Kasi we're not really investing a lot on research and development, and also in higher education. Yan din yung among the domains of higher education, hindi tayo masyadong madaming scientists, researchers, or those who have published journals. So ang daming aspeto na magandang i-improve in terms of STEM education. Policy-wise, andyan. But in terms again of solid program, and kailangan pa natin mga balik scientists, ituloy-ulit natin yan, program, those who studied in the US and others, kailangan pa rin natin silang encourage to give back to the country. So I think that's my contribution in STEM education in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
That's a lot, Doc Ethel, and we really appreciate that. No? Now, from the ASEAN and global perspective, let's listen to Father June, because he has been engaged in a lot of these opportunities to strengthen STEM education in the country. So, Father June, please go ahead.
I am the president of FUSE. FUSE is supposed to be an organization for the foundation of great standard of education, particularly focused on science, math, and English. So I've done the English part, and now I'd like to see the science and the mathematics aspect of it. So we initiated the linkage in order to pursue the STEM project that we have to include in the curriculum, by having a kind of linkage with our counterpart in the United States, where they have been developing the STEM approach toward the curriculum. And with the consortium of PNU, FUSE, and PhilSci Hub, we have created a group and tried to train teachers, trying to really, how do you do the STEMifying, the different part of the curriculum, so that we can now be creative, innovative, and we can take that leadership in introducing technology. And I think we cannot do that also without really having a close association with industry, okay? Because industry is the one that gives you the lead role in order to see and become creative, responding to the needs that they have. And therefore, it's there that you should anchor the movement of the whole thing. And science and mathematics give you the kind of framework by which to approach the different, let me say, issues that have been confronted. Observation, experimentation, and all of this ones happens there. You know? And therefore, that kind of disposition includes the use of technology at this moment. And this is what we are trying to see also in Tibet, no? That we're not just repetitions of what the things that have been handed down to us. And for example, now the craze of, like I was always commenting this, why is it that only public schools are focusing very much on industries like hair care, nail care, and all those different care, without advancing it into the technology that will respond to the economic development of the country, you know? And try to see. That's why the approach of test that now is supposed to be a market-based, area-based, and labor market-driven basis of how it can now serve the community in that aspect. And therefore, we push for higher technical skills, being innovative and trying to see how do you respond to particular problems there in the community, and how these industries that are there would offer the facilities and all this one so that they can all work together. And I think we have started that kind of approach when with the diploma program, which is supposed to be a higher level of training in technical education, of trying to work with the industry and the different, let's say, stakeholders in that particular area, trying to see what should the curriculum be, how will be the interaction of technology developed in this technology, and how it will be marketed, who will absorb our students, and the industry that has us to prepare in order that they can still further develop in that sense. No? I think this is a holistic approach, and integrated approach, collaborative approach of everybody involved in the area towards the development of a particular thing that this technology has to be applied. So this is the thing that perhaps has taken us a lot, and I think we are continuing developing this one now, and we are pursuing. No? For example, now I was trying to gather all our industry in terms of cybersecurity, very much in need. And how do you now have to propose a program that can respond to that higher level of skills training relevant to that particular area, where they will be also absorbed later on as they finish the course. So I think this is that we have been giving kind of lot of work in this one, and very much in terms of the close coordination of everyone in the region in this one. That's why we will have this also approach in terms of the evolution of local government. This is the thing that I'm now studying, how to insert ourselves in that context and structure of now being devolved all these services in the local government.
Yeah. Father June, thank you for the inputs. No? And I think based on the comments that I'm seeing on our chat room, no, there's a lot that we really have to rethink about the connection of the various levels in our education system, especially in terms of STEM education. And I understand that you and Mark have worked towards connecting also our priorities in STEM education relative to the Philippine qualifications framework and all these things that are necessary to create the seamlessness. No, of course, we would like to to talk about all these other greater issues, and we'd like to thank our audience for putting in their contributions also. There's one actually who'd like a separate forum on what we have done with Indigenous people's education. Maybe that's something that we can consider. But in the interest of time, because we understand that you would also have to attend to your domestic affairs and our guests have to attend their meetings too, we'll jump into a very important segment, which will ask our panelists to look at a brewing issue right now, which is the direction towards the facilitation of a second Congressional Commission on EDCOM, or EDCOM 2, and the possibility of creating a National Education Council. So recently, several groups have been pushing for these two reforms, given the crisis, quote unquote, that a trifocalized system of education has spawned. So we will quickly ask Father June, Diane, Ethel, and Carol on what they think are, what insights they have about these two directions, EDCOM 2 and the creation of a National Education Council. So, Father June, we're going to start with you again.
Yeah, there have been a lot of consultation at the Congress level and Senate level discussing this issue. And the resolution that we have done is to have a study of the whole process and make a recommendation of how we will proceed with EDCOM 2. No? So I think they have that kind of direction, because they say we cannot anymore go back to because there was the kind of move that again go back to the same structure that we have one system of our education, which at this moment is not entertained. No, therefore we would see how to really now make that kind of coordination of this trifocalized system and make it operate in that way, and try to see the coordination by putting this council that can really now work as a oversight of all this effort that will really now try to put that coordination. So I think this is still a talking point in Congress, and trying to see now the resolution of that direction. And we are at this moment in this kind of dialogue.
Okay, thank you, Father June. And I think with you having seen several governments or several presidents working on this, there's a lot of input that should really be that you should really be putting into this discussion. And we're very glad that you're representing us in those consultative bodies. So we move on to Dr. Ethel. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So fresh pa sa mind ko yung EDCOM 1 and also nagkaroon tayo no ng PISER, and then we also have an executive order on that, institutionalizing the system of national coordination, assessment, planning, and monitoring. So ito yung kasi nasa CHED pa ako noon and we are attending some coordinating meetings. Ang hirap i-convene ng tatlong agencies actually. Siguro naging successful lang siya. Baka once naka-attend ako ng one successful finally, at least in my life sa government. So I was in government since 95. Nung kinirate ang CHED, I was one of the first na nandun. And maganda na magkaroon ng EDCOM 2 kasi ang dami na nagbago na yung mundo. Everything changed overnight, especially during the pandemic. We have digitalization, we have also a lot of digital skills requirement, and then meron din tayong mga new programs na dapat ayusin due to the ranking in international assessment. So kailangan natin, if not i-overhaul yung system of depending on EDCOM recommendation, is to see the lessons learned from EDCOM 1. So tingnan natin what worked and what did not work in EDCOM 1. Ano yung mga naiwan pa na dapat i-implement. So it will start with, EDCOM 2 will start with reviewing the glories and perhaps the spaces to move forward. And bakit hindi nag-work yung National Coordinating Council for Education? So kailangan din nating tingnan yan. Bakit ayaw mag-meeting ng 3 agencies? And now we have also the ECCD Council. So kasi in other countries, nag-work naman yung Interagency Committee for Coordination. And in Southeast Asia, halos pareho tayo nagkaroon ng mga trifocalization, right? Thailand also had their Ministry of University Affairs na naging higher education, and then na-integrate. Malaysia also had Ministry of Higher Education, and then na-integrate na rin. And then, so it's like coming together, and then after thinking about parang masyadong malaki yung educational system, they will go back to separate entities. So tingnan natin yon and learn from the lessons na nakuha natin from EDCOM 1. And all of these, paano talaga natin strengthen yung coordination. As an example, Ed, I was in the K-12 committee. Di ba yung sunod nun after nagawa ng DepEd, pupunta siya sa CHED. So merong transition group yan eh. So dapat kasi nung na-reform din yung basic education, susunod na rin yung mga revision of curriculum sa higher education para as a whole. Kasi yung graduate, like yung graduate ng K-12, ano na yung kanila, first and second year ba sila ulit o parang 3 years na lang yung higher ed. So ang daming dapat ayusin dito. So I see the need for EDCOM to iron out the integrated system of education by having a coordinating council. And yung mga plans na ginawa for K-12 na dapat na-respond agad ang higher education and pivot. So kailangan plansyahin pa rin yan. So I go for creation of EDCOM 2 with review of the highlights, lessons learned from EDCOM 1. Thank you.
Ganda niyan, Ethel. No? Perfect because this afternoon, yung makakasagot nung nasaluban ng CHED, yung nasimulan sa basic ed, mamaya maririnig natin nandyan siya. No? So, saktong-sakto. But for now, another agency really pushing hard for the harmonization of the trifocalized system is the Philippine Business for Education. So good thing that Diane is here and would listen to her before we move on to Mark. So Diane, please go ahead.
Thanks, Ed. So even before the pandemic, no, sinusulong ng Philippine Business for Education yung EDCOM. Actually, in 2019, we were successful with the legislators to file it. Kaso nagkaroon ng COVID. So ngayon, patapos na yung 18th Congress, hindi pa rin siya naiisa batas. Pero may usad naman. So it's for bicameral conference na. Pero kasi, di ba, recess ang Congress. So we only have May until about few weeks of June to have it passed. And then, so to have it ratified and signed by the President. Pero dito rin papasok yung importansya ng education president o ng education administration. Kasi regardless kung anong mangyari sa EDCOM 2, ma-ratify man o hindi, pwede kasi itong maging executive order eh. So dapat yung magiging education president natin, magiging presidente natin, will have the political will at saka he or she really knows what to do with education, o ano yung kailangan o mga problema ng edukasyon. So, ang hinihingi ng PBED is for it to be multi-stakeholder in composition. Hindi lang pwedeng government agencies o legislation ang magko-compose nito. Kasi ang daming apektado eh. So, sana kasama yung business sector, yung industries, even the private schools, at saka parents. Kasi yung nga, education, madaming naapektuhan. And with the discussion that we had this afternoon, ang dami talagang kabit-kabit na issues, no, na kailangan nating masolusyonan, and having a wider lens or a wider perspective will really help us learn and improve our education systems and strategies.
Thank you, Diane, and I really hope that more people can join us in that advocacy to really push for that and much needed harmonization. Speaking of that tremendous amount of work of bringing people together, nako ito, talaga namang hindi to natutulog, nagugutom na, nauuhaw minsan. Letting agencies come together, no? So sige, let's listen to Carol. Carol?
Thank you, Ed. I think I will respond to this in various ways. The first one is when we were passing the K-12 law then, no, I was with Senator Angara, and actually there was a K-12 steering committee where the three agencies would meet regularly with other stakeholders. And I think that was siguro a pocket of success, although obviously hindi siya super regular at hindi siya sustained afterwards. When I was with CHED, we also had this interagency committee where we would bring up problems siguro that we're facing, that is parang biglang nag-arise na problem in senior high school implementation na pwedeng ma-resolve ng CHED. For example, yung college readiness standards, yung issue kung tatanggapin ba yung mga bumabalik na learners towards higher education kung may napasa ng senior high school pero hindi sila senior high school graduate. So yung mga ganyang policies na iron out. Pero I think more than coordination, kasi coordination can be done if there is a will to do it. No, may channels naman, may relationships. It can be done. Coordination is important. Babalikan ko yung sinabi ni Dayan. Education President mahalaga kasi 3 cabinet secretaries ito. Kung hindi walang orchestra, sino yung konduktor? Kailangan mo ng konduktor na talagang pinag-uusap yung mga miyembro ng orchestra. Kasi yun yung mahalaga. Hindi kailangan ng batas para gawin ito. Trabaho to ng isang education president. Pero more than coordination, I think a coherent strategy is more important. Kasi baka naman walang drive mag-meeting kasi hindi nila nakikita kung paano nagkakabit-kabit ang trabaho nilang 3. Hindi ba? So kung sa simula pa lang integrated yung plano at dependent sila sa isa't isa para ma-achieve ang kanilang goal, mas siguro magkakaroon tayo ng motivation to actually regularly meet. But I think the beauty of EDCOM in the past, no, in EDCOM 1 and hopefully in EDCOM 2, is that apart from just coordinating the 3 agencies or making their plans integrated, it also needs to look beyond the education sector. You know, the research I'm doing now is really on the labor implications or the labor market outcomes of higher education graduates. And what we're seeing is that in the past decade, yung worth of a college degree, kalahati today than 10 years ago. What does it mean? You have an oversupply of college graduates in certain fields and professions, but not enough in others. Meaning to say, hindi efficient yung human capital development planning natin and how we are implementing it. We are investing a lot in higher education, but are there enough high-paying jobs to take them in afterwards? Kasi kung hindi, graduate ka, may diploma ka, ang daming pamilya nagsisikap, nagpapakahirap para maipadala sa magandang paaralan ang kanilang anak, pero walang trabaho pagkatapos. Or yung trabaho, parang konti na lang ang tinembot galing sa high school graduate. Bakit ganon? So kailangan natin pag-isipan yan. Yung plano sa edukasyon, hindi pwedeng hiwalay sa plano sa ekonomiya, plano sa trabaho, plano sa pangangailangan sa healthcare. For example, kitang-kita natin yan ngayong pandemic. Ang dami nating graduate sa nursing, pero ang baba ng passing rate. Pero yung nurses kulang na kulang sa bansa. Ang laki ng gap natin sa healthcare workers. Bakit ganun? Kailangan tugma-tugma yan. Dapat honest to goodness Philippine Development Plan, honest to goodness plan for education. Tulad ng sinabi ni Ethel, where do we see ourselves 10 to 20 years from now? What is our vision? Because we can't say that our vision is in 5 years ganito. That is not a vision. That is a short-term plan. We need a vision. And how does that picture look like? I don't think it's clear to any of us, or I don't think there's an explicit plan that we have seen in the past decade. And that is something we need to work on. And then constant monitoring. Kasi sa Pilipinas, ang alam naman natin nangyayari, pag nagsimula ng project, tas nag-iba ng administration, tigil yung mga dating proyekto, we don't learn from our mistakes, no? Which is a very scientific, I guess, characteristic, no? That you document, you learn from your errors, you improve on it. Sa atin, tigil, wag na natin balikan yan, mag-start tayo ng bago. Hindi pwede ganun kasi hindi tayo natututo sa mga kamalian natin. We should learn from ourselves, from our own mistakes, but we should also take stock of our successes. So hopefully that is something that the National Coordinating Council for Education can do, and hopefully the EDCOM 2 can achieve for us.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. No? May nag-direct message sa akin. Pwede bang patakbuhin sa Senado yung mga nakaupo sa panel na to? Okay. Pwede naman po. Pero mas marami itong magagawa dahil they can lead us into further understanding what we can do to influence the kind of leaders that we have. In fact, yan po ang reason why we convene them. So we are running out of time here and we don't want to inconvenience anyone. No? So just quickly, we would like to tell you that we will be putting together all the insights that we have gathered here this evening, and we will just quickly tell you what's the direction of the series based on the inputs of our esteemed guests. So I will ask Michael to show us on the screen what the Philippine Business for Education has initially shared with us, and we would like our audience members to look at this very carefully. After the KBP Presidential Forum, where we first lodged issues and questions relative to education, there are 4 important priorities that we would like to see in the next leadership. Maayos na pamamalakad sa edukasyon, maayos na learning environment para sa lahat, lalo pat nagkaroon tayo ng pandemya, at empowered na mga guro at mga paaralan, at panghuli, mataas na kalidad ng edukasyon para sa lahat. We will now be putting together your insights, babangga po natin dito, and we will be inviting the representatives of our presidentiables to talk about the actual platform for education. Sana po ay naibigan nyo ang ating sama-samang pagkukuro-kuro sa hapong ito at pinapasalamatan po natin ang ating mga tagapagsalita sa hapong ito. Nahihingan natin ng isang maikling salita lang. So ano dapat ang hanapin natin sa mga kandidato natin dahil ito ay isang mahalagang priority para sa ating lahat. So mabilis lang po, tapos magsasalita tayo, si Dayan, susunod si Carol, si Doc Ethel, at saka si Father June. So go ahead, Dayan. Maikli lang, anong hahanapin natin?
Track record, competency, integrity.
Okay, salamat, Dayan. Carol?
I think sa akin, kailangan natin ng competence at character. Pagdating sa competence, ang presidente natin hindi pwedeng absentee. Kailangan nagpapakita on top of the work at gumagawa ng homework, pinag-aaralan para magawa yung trabahong kailangan gawin sa education. Pagdating sa character, dapat yung tinuturo natin sa schools, honesty, integrity, hard work, compassion. Kung wala ito, wala tayong magagawa kasi dapat ang puso ng presidente natin para sa edukasyon at para sa mahihirap.
Okay. Salamat, Carol. Now we'll move on to Doc Ethel.
So actually, sa CMEO, we are not political. Pero the question is okay. What do I look forward to having as the next president? Dalawa lang hinahanap ko, intelligence and education. These are actually, for me, indispensable components of good leadership. Sabi ni Plato, di ba, a learned leader stands better chance of doing well more than his counterpart. Kung maganda yung edukasyon at kanyang IQ and pananaw, so he or she can do more and can do better. Of course, secondary to the intelligence and education na pulido, we look at the track record and political career. Meron ba siyang experience sa governance and all? So, yun lamang po. Apologies po. Dahil lang kay Dr. Ed kaya ako nagsalita.
Salamat, Doc Ethel, and we hope we did not place you in a difficult light, but we would like our people to hear from distinguished people like you involved in the education sector what we have to look for. And finally, we'll listen to Father June in essential. Father June?
Siguro yung essence ng synodality na nakikipag-usap sa atin, sinasali tayo sa usapan, at nakikibahagi sa aksyon ating gagawin. Yun ang gusto ko isang tagapamuno na nagkukonsulta at nakikisa sa trabahong ating ginagawang sama-sama.
Maraming salamat po, Father June. Signal na po yun ni Father June. Kailangan na siya umattend ng susunod niyang meeting. Saktong-sakto, Father June. No? So muli, maraming salamat po sa ating lahat na nakilahok para sa hapong ito at sana po ay napulot nyo ang mga pinakamahalagang usapin natin ngayon hinggil sa ating sistema ng edukasyon. Sa ngalan po ng pamunuan ng National Teachers College at ang aming katuwang na organisasyon, ang Philippine Business for Education. Sa ating mga tagapagsalita, si Father June Inocencio, si Dr. Ethel Agnes Valenzuela, si Dayan Fajardo at si Carol Marquis. Ako po si Ed Fermin. Pinaanyayahan ko po kayo, sagutan niyo po yung aming evaluation form at makakakuha kayo ng certificate. Alam niyo naman, kailangan nating lahat yan. At sana nga po, sa susunod nating episode, kikilalanin natin who is the education president. This is the Learning Crisis Webinar Series. Maraming salamat po. Hanggang sa muli.
Kailangan magkaroon ng reforma sa edukasyon sa Pilipinas. Ayon ngayon kay Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. Ito ay matapos lumabas ang maituturing na poor performance ng Pilipinas sa ilang international studies tulad ng South.
We need to tackle the Philippine crisis together. The National Teachers College commits itself to responding to this need. While there are several ways to address the crisis, NTC believes we need to begin with our teachers dahil ang bawat magiting na guro ay tanglaw. We seek to prepare teachers who will no longer just focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic, but on reasoning, resilience, and responsibility. We seek to enhance teachers' capabilities in addressing the needs of a variety of learners. We seek to advise teachers in terms of their personal well-being and the wellness of the communities they are part of. But we need to find support for a great majority of our teachers for their continuous personal and professional development. As we continue to make professional teacher education more affordable, fun and flexible, frustration-free and innovative, we shall work with distinct partners in taking care of our teachers' needs. Dahil sa NTC, kagitingan ang gawing tanglaw ang bawat guro ng bayan.
Isang gabi, ikaw ay bibitaw. Sa isang iglap ng ang itim ang ulap, bawat langhap sabay, tingin sa alapaan, sa mong kailan matatapos ang matamasahan na kasiyahang minimiti, ngunit ang lahat ay may hangganan. Palaging sisikat ang araw sa silangan, ang liwanag ay muling masisilayan, at kaligayahan ay muling mararamdaman. Tanglaw, sa bawat araw, tanglaw, nagniningning dinhin ang pag-asa. Tanglaw, sa aming puso'y nagliliyang, dala-dala mo. Bagong umaga,
kailangang umahon, lahat ay babangon. Hindi mauupos ang pag-asa, tatayon muling lalaban pa. Sa mga unos ay di pagagapos, paglilingkod sa kapwa ay di matatapos. Pagkat bawat dilim ay may tanglaw, masisilayan din ang sinag ng araw. Kahit magulo ang ikot ng mundo, piliting umapit, piliting umawit.
Tanglaw, nariyan ka sa bawat